Have you ever noticed something unsettling? The people who promise they'll always be there are often the first to disappear when life stops benefiting them. It's a painful truth, but history has repeated it for centuries. Loyalty is celebrated in words and abandoned in moments of pressure. Most people spend their lives believing friendship is unconditional. They expect honesty, sacrifice, and unwavering support. But the world doesn't operate on expectations. It operates on human nature. People change when circumstances change, interests shift, priorities evolve. The moment your value declines, many relationships quietly reveal what they truly were all along. This isn't a message of bitterness. It's a message of awakening. The strongest individuals are not those surrounded by countless friends. They are the ones who understand the difference between genuine respect and temporary convenience. They stop confusing attention with loyalty, and they never build their future on promises that can vanish overnight. The harsh reality is that disappointment rarely comes from strangers. It comes from people you trusted without question. And once you understand why this happens, you stop taking betrayal personally. Instead, you begin to see the invisible rules that govern every human relationship. In today's video, you'll discover why blind loyalty is one of the most dangerous illusions you can believe, why expecting people to remain the same is a losing game, and how the most powerful people protect themselves without becoming cold or cynical. By the end, you'll look at friendship, trust, and loyalty through an entirely different lens, and once you see this truth, there is no going back. Stay with me until the end, because the lesson that changes your relationships forever is the one almost nobody is willing to hear. Let me begin with a question that most people never dare to ask themselves. How many of the people you call friends would still stand beside you if tomorrow you lost your money, your influence, your reputation, or your usefulness? It's an uncomfortable question because it forces you to confront something that human beings spend their entire lives trying to avoid. We want to believe that loyalty is permanent. We want to believe that once someone calls us a friend, they have entered into an invisible contract that time can never break. But life has a way of exposing illusions, and this may be the greatest illusion of them all. Think about history for a moment. Empires were not destroyed only by powerful enemies. Kings were betrayed by trusted advisors. Great generals were abandoned by the very soldiers who once praised them. Successful leaders found themselves surrounded by admirers while they were winning, only to discover silence the moment they began to lose. This pattern has repeated itself across centuries because it is rooted in something far deeper than culture or circumstance. It is rooted in human nature. The mistake most people make is assuming that friendship exists outside the laws of human behavior. It doesn't. Every relationship is influenced by changing emotions, changing priorities, changing ambitions, and changing needs. The person who supports you today may be facing entirely different desires a year from now. They are not necessarily evil. They are simply human. And when you expect permanence from something that is constantly changing, disappointment becomes inevitable. This is why expectations can quietly become your greatest enemy. The higher your expectations, the greater your suffering. When reality refuses to cooperate, you begin asking questions that have no satisfying answers. Why did they change? Why did they leave? Why weren't they loyal? In many cases, the truth is painfully simple. They didn't suddenly become a different person. The circumstances changed, and those circumstances revealed who they had always been. Notice how people behave when everything is going well. Compliments come easily, support feels effortless. Everyone enjoys standing beside someone who is successful, confident, and moving upward. But life has a remarkable way of testing every relationship. Failure strips away appearances. Hardship removes masks. The moment your success fades, many of the people around you begin calculating what remaining beside you might cost them. It is in these moments that you discover whether someone values you or merely the benefits of being associated with you. This realization can sound harsh, but it is actually one of the most liberating lessons you will ever learn. Once you stop demanding impossible loyalty from people, you stop living in constant fear of betrayal. You become a careful observer instead of a desperate believer. You stop listening only to promises and start paying attention to patterns. Actions begin speaking louder than comforting words. Consistency becomes more valuable than affection. Character becomes more important than charm. This doesn't mean you should become cold, suspicious, or incapable of trust. Quite the opposite. It means your trust becomes intelligent instead of blind. You appreciate loyalty when it appears, but you never assume it is guaranteed forever. You understand that every relationship requires observation, patience, and realistic expectations. That mindset protects your peace far more effectively than wishful thinking ever could. The strongest people are rarely the ones who expect the most from others. They are the ones who expect the most from themselves. They build a life that doesn't collapse when someone walks away. They learn to enjoy companionship without becoming dependent on it. They value friendship without making it the foundation of their identity. As a result, they are far less vulnerable to disappointment because they're emotional. Stability no longer rests in someone else's hands. The truth is not that no one can ever be loyal. Genuine loyalty exists, but it is extraordinarily rare, and rarity is exactly what gives it value. If everyone were loyal under every circumstance, loyalty would no longer be a virtue. It would simply be ordinary. Instead, life asks you to earn wisdom before you recognize the few people who truly deserve your trust. The day you stop expecting loyalty from everyone is the day betrayal loses its power over you. Now, once you let go of the illusion that loyalty is guaranteed, another question naturally begins to surface. If people aren't driven primarily by loyalty, stability no longer rests in someone else's hands. The truth is not that no one can ever be loyal. Genuine loyalty exists, but it is extraordinarily rare, and rarity is exactly what gives it value. If everyone were loyal under every circumstance, loyalty would no longer be a virtue. It would simply be ordinary. From the moment we enter the world, we learn to seek what protects us, what benefits us, and what helps us survive. As adults, those instincts don't disappear. They simply become more sophisticated. Instead of fighting for food or shelter, we compete for opportunities, recognition, influence, security, and status. Every decision, whether conscious or unconscious, is filtered through a simple question: how does this affect me? Once you understand this, human behavior becomes far less confusing. Think about how quickly relationships change when circumstances shift. A colleague who once supported your ideas suddenly distances themselves after someone more influential enters the room. A friend who celebrated your victories becomes strangely quiet as your success surpasses their own. Someone who promised to stand by your side begins making excuses when helping you requires real sacrifice. At first, these moments feel deeply personal. You wonder what you did wrong, you search for hidden mistakes, but often the answer has very little to do with you. Their priorities changed, and their actions simply followed those priorities. This is why words alone are such unreliable guides. People often speak from emotion, from guilt, from excitement, or from a desire to be seen as kind and loyal. In the moment, they may sincerely believe every promise they make. But when reality demands a difficult choice, emotions fade and self-interest quietly takes control. Suddenly, the promise that once sounded unbreakable begins to bend under the weight of convenience. That doesn't necessarily make people dishonest. It makes them human. One of the greatest mistakes you can make is expecting others to consistently act against their own interests, simply because they care about you. There are exceptional individuals who will do exactly that, but they are rare. Most people, when faced with protecting themselves or protecting someone else, will instinctively choose themselves. This isn't cynicism, it is observation. History confirms this lesson again and again. Alliances between nations last only as long as they serve mutual interests. Business partnerships thrive while both sides continue to benefit. Even families experience conflict when money, inheritance, or power enters the picture. Human beings rarely abandon self-interest completely. They simply disguise it beneath noble language. good intentions, or emotional promises. Once you recognize this pattern, something remarkable happens. You stop feeling shocked every time someone acts in their own favor. Instead of reacting emotionally, you begin observing calmly. You ask yourself, what motivates this person? What do they stand to gain? What are they protecting? These questions reveal far more than anything people say out loud. This shift also changes the way you move through the world. Instead of relying on blind trust, you begin paying attention to incentives. You realize that people's actions are often shaped less by their words and more by what they believe they can gain or lose. You become more patient before placing complete confidence in someone. You allow time to expose character because time is the one thing that strips away performance and reveals true priorities. Ironically, understanding self-interest doesn't make you less compassionate. It makes you wiser. You stop demanding perfection from flawed human beings. You no longer expect everyone to think, sacrifice, or care exactly as you would. That unrealistic expectation is what creates so much unnecessary heartbreak. When you see people clearly, without illusion, you can appreciate their strengths while remaining aware of their limitations. The truly powerful person doesn't become bitter after learning this truth. They become strategic. They know that trust should be built slowly, respect should be earned consistently, and loyalty should never be assumed simply because someone smiles, praises you, or shares your company today. They understand that character is revealed not when life is comfortable, but when choices become costly. And once you stop expecting people to rise above their nature, you'll finally stop being controlled by their decisions. That's the moment you begin reclaiming your own power. The person who understands human nature is never surprised by human behavior. Once you understand that people are often guided by self-interest, the next lesson becomes unavoidable. If you continue to depend on other people for your emotional security, you hand them a kind of power they never earn. Whether they intend to use it or not, your peace of mind becomes tied to decisions you cannot control. And that is one of the most dangerous positions you can place yourself in. Most people never realize how much of their happiness depends on someone else's approval. They wait for a message to feel valued. They expect constant reassurance to feel loved. They measure their worth by how often others include them, praise them, or choose them. At first, this seems harmless. After all, everyone wants to feel accepted. But over time, this quiet dependence grows into an invisible chain. Without noticing it, you begin shaping your behavior around the fear of losing people instead of the desire to remain true to yourself. Look closely at what happens when someone becomes emotionally dependent. They tolerate disrespect they should never accept. They remain silent when they should speak. They apologize for mistakes they never made. They constantly try to prove their value, hoping that enough kindness, enough sacrifice, or enough patience will guarantee loyalty in return. But relationships built on fear are never secure. The more desperately you try to hold on to people, the more control you give them over your emotions. There is a strange paradox in human nature. People are often drawn to those who possess an independent spirit. The individual who can enjoy companionship without needing it carries a quiet confidence that others instinctively respect. Why? Because independence communicates strength. It tells the world that your identity does not depend on someone else's opinion. It shows that your decisions come from conviction rather than desperation. This doesn't mean isolating yourself or pretending you don't need anyone. Human connection is valuable. Friendship, love, and trust enrich life in countless ways. Hoping that enough kindness, enough sacrifice, or enough patience will guarantee loyalty in return. But relationships built on fear are never. The strongest individuals build something much deeper. They develop an internal source of stability. Their confidence comes from the promises they keep to themselves. Their discipline becomes their closest ally. Their purpose gives them direction even when everyone else walks away. Because they know who they are not constantly asking others to define them. Think about the people who seem impossible to shake. They experience disappointment just like everyone else. Friends leave, relationships end. Trust is broken, yet somehow they continue moving forward without becoming consumed by bitterness. The difference isn't that they feel less pain. The difference is that their entire identity wasn't built upon the person who betrayed them. They lose a relationship, but they don't lose themselves. This kind of emotional strength is developed through practice. It begins with spending time alone without feeling lonely. It grows every time you make a difficult decision based on your values instead of your fear of being disliked. It becomes stronger every time you stop chasing validation and start investing in your own growth. Slowly, you realize that peace is not something another person gives you. It is something you create within yourself. Ironically, this inner security transforms the quality of your relationships. When you no longer cling to people, they feel less pressure around you. Your kindness becomes genuine rather than transactional. Your generosity no longer hides an expectation of repayment. You choose people because you value them, not because you fear being alone. And if someone decides to leave, you let them go with dignity rather than desperation. This is where true freedom begins. You stop negotiating your standards to keep people comfortable. You stop shrinking your ambitions to protect someone else's ego. You stop sacrificing your self-respect in exchange for temporary acceptance. You realize that no friendship, no relationship, and no promise is worth abandoning the person you are becoming. There will always be people who come and go. Some will stay for years. Others will disappear the moment life becomes inconvenient. You cannot control that. But you can control whether their choices determine your emotional state. That is a decision that belongs to you alone. When your happiness depends on no one has the power to take it away now. Once you've stopped depending on other people for your emotional stability, something begins to change. You stop asking, who truly loves me, and start asking a far more important question, who truly respects me. That single shift in perspective changes everything, because respect is far more durable than affection, and far more reliable than friendship built on emotion alone. Many people spend their lives chasing approval. They want everyone to like them. They avoid conflict, constantly agree with others, and sacrifice their own boundaries to keep relationships peaceful. At first glance, this seems like kindness, but beneath the surface, it often comes from fear, the fear of rejection, criticism, or being left behind. Ironically, the more desperately you seek to be liked, the less people tend to value you. Human nature has an unusual tendency. We admire people who value themselves. We respect individuals who have principles they refuse to compromise. They don't need to raise their voices or demand attention. Their behavior quietly communicates that their standards are not for sale. That silent confidence creates something much stronger than popularity. It creates credibility. Think about the people you've respected most throughout your life. Chances are, it wasn't because they constantly tried to impress everyone. It was because they remained consistent. Even when consistency came at a cost, they kept their word. They accepted responsibility for their mistakes. They maintained their dignity under pressure. They didn't change their personality every time they entered a different room. Their character remained steady, regardless of who was watching. Respect grows from predictability of character. Friendship often grows from shared experiences and emotions, but emotions change. Respect grows from repeated evidence. Every decision you make either strengthens or weakens how people perceive you. Every time you abandon your values for temporary approval, you quietly teach others that your principles are negotiable. And once people believe your standards can be negotiated, they begin testing your limits. This is why boundaries are so important. Many people mistake boundaries for arrogance or coldness, but healthy boundaries are simply expressions of self-respect. They communicate that your time, your energy, and your dignity have value. They show that while you're willing to be generous, you're not willing to be exploited. People may not always like your boundaries, but they almost always understand them. Notice how often disrespect begins with small moments. Someone jokes at your expense to entertain others. Someone asks for favors but disappears when you need help. If these behaviors are ignored, they rarely disappear. They usually become stronger. Every unchallenged act of disrespect becomes permission for the next one. That's why powerful individuals address problems early, not through anger, but through calm consistency. Another mistake people make is revealing everything about themselves too quickly. They believe complete openness automatically creates trust. In reality, mystery has value. When every thought, every insecurity, and every future plan is constantly shared, people begin to take your presence for granted. There is strength in restraint. There is influence in knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. The person who reveals themselves gradually maintains a sense of depth that others naturally respect. This doesn't mean becoming secretive or manipulative. It means understanding that not every opinion needs to be expressed, not every emotion needs to be displayed, and not every battle deserves your attention. Calmness itself becomes a form of authority. While others react impulsively, you observe. While others seek constant validation, you quietly continue your work. Over time, this consistency builds a reputation that no amount of empty charm can replace. What's fascinating is that genuine respect often attracts healthier relationships than endless friendliness ever could. People know where they stand with you. They trust your consistency because you don't pretend to be someone you're not. They understand that your kindness comes from strength, not from the fear of losing them. And because your approval isn't handed out carelessly, it becomes meaningful when it is given. Remember, respect isn't something you demand. The moment you beg for it, you've already weakened it. Respect is earned through discipline, emotional control, competence, integrity, and the courage to walk away from relationships that repeatedly compromise your dignity. It grows slowly, sometimes silently, but once established, it becomes one of the strongest forms of influence you can possess. So stop measuring your life by how many people call you a friend. Measure it by the standards you refuse to betray and the character you maintain when no one is applauding. Friendships may come and go, admiration may rise and fall, but a reputation built on self-respect has a remarkable way of enduring. Never trade your dignity for acceptance, because respect is worth far more than applause. By now, you've seen a pattern that many people spend their entire lives trying to ignore. Loyalty is not guaranteed. Human beings are influenced by self-interest. Emotional dependence creates unnecessary suffering, and respect will always outlast the temporary comfort of being liked. So where does that leave you? Does this mean you should stop trusting people altogether? Should you close yourself off from the world and assume everyone is waiting for the opportunity to betray you? Absolutely not. That would simply replace one illusion with another. The goal is not to become suspicious of everyone. The goal is to become wise enough to understand people without being controlled by your expectations of them. There is an enormous difference between living with blind trust and living with clear vision. One invites disappointment. The other creates freedom. The strongest people don't walk through life believing everyone is dishonest. They simply recognize that trust is something to be earned over time. They understand that words are inexpensive, but consistency carries a price. Anyone can promise loyalty when life is comfortable. Anyone can say, "I'll always be there for you." But only time has the power to test those promises. This is why patience becomes one of your greatest advantages. Most people rush relationships. They reveal everything too quickly. They place enormous expectations on people they barely know. They mistake chemistry for character and excitement for reliability. Then, when reality finally catches up, they call it betrayal. In truth, they simply trusted before they had enough evidence. Observe instead of assuming. Watch instead of rushing. Give people enough time to reveal who they are. Character is never proven in perfect moments. It reveals itself when someone gains power, faces pressure, experiences envy, or is forced to choose between convenience and principle. Those moments expose the truth far more clearly than years of pleasant conversation ever could. Another important lesson is learning to separate mistakes from patterns. Every human being will disappoint you occasionally. We all make poor decisions. We all have moments of weakness. Wisdom doesn't demand perfection from others. What it demands is attention. If someone apologizes, changes their behavior, and demonstrates growth, that's one thing. But if the same behavior repeats over and over again, stop calling it an accident. It has become part of their character. Too many people ignore repeated patterns because they desperately want the relationship to survive. They create excuses where clarity is needed. They tell themselves, maybe this time will be different. Meanwhile, the evidence continues to grow. Remember this. When actions repeat consistently, they stop being exceptions. They become predictions. There is another trap you must avoid. Never allow one betrayal to convince you that everyone deserves your distrust. Pain has a way of distorting perception. After being hurt, the mind often searches for certainty by believing the worst about everyone. But that mindset imprisons you just as much as blind trust does. If you expect betrayal everywhere, you will eventually push away the very people who might have deserved your confidence. Real wisdom lives between those two extremes. It neither worships people nor fears them. It sees them clearly. It appreciates loyalty without demanding it. It values friendship without becoming dependent on it. It welcomes love without surrendering self-respect. That balance is where emotional freedom begins. As you move through life, some people will surprise you with extraordinary integrity. Others will disappoint you in ways you never imagined. Neither experience should define your entire worldview. Instead, let each interaction sharpen your judgment. Let every relationship teach you something about human nature and about yourself. In the end, the greatest form of security is not finding someone who promises never to leave. It is becoming the kind of person who remains steady, even if they do. When your confidence comes from your values, your discipline, and your understanding of reality, betrayal loses its ability to destroy you. It may hurt, but it will no longer break you. That is the quiet strength that history has always rewarded. The individual who sees people as they are, not as they wish them to be, moves through the world with calm confidence. They don't chase loyalty. They don't beg for commitment. They don't build their future on someone else's promises. They build it on their own character. And when you reach that point, something remarkable happens. You stop fearing who might leave your life because you finally understand that the one person who must never abandon you is yourself. Master people without hating them, and you'll never become a prisoner of disappointment again. Before you leave, remember this. The greatest mistake isn't being betrayed. It's refusing to learn from betrayal. Every person who walked away, every broken promise, and every disappointment was teaching you the same lesson. Build your strength on yourself, not on someone else's loyalty. Respect people, but never depend on them for your peace. Trust wisely, observe patiently, and let actions speak louder than words. If this message changed the way you see friendship and loyalty, subscribe for more videos that reveal the hidden psychology behind human nature. Until next time, stay calm, stay aware, and never surrender your power. If this message challenged your beliefs, that's because the truth often feels uncomfortable before it becomes empowering. Don't leave this video feeling cynical. Leave it feeling wiser. You don't need everyone to stay. You don't need everyone's approval. And you certainly don't need blind loyalty to build an extraordinary life. The people who truly belong in your journey will reveal themselves through consistent actions, not empty promises. Everyone else is simply passing through, teaching you another lesson about human nature. If you found value in this video,